Hello everybody, this is Ray Lutz. I'm going to go over this procedure called the Snapshot Oversight, which is for to allow us to provide oversight for election processing to hopefully eliminate any kind of central tabulator manipulation. What I'd like to go over here is this flow chart and talk you through the whole thing with this one picture. First off, let me just say that this should be applicable to all counties and election districts in California, and it may be applicable to other areas. It all depends upon if they perform a 1% manual tally, which is now required by the in California, and it may be required in other states, but if it's not, you should push for that to be included. Okay, let's get started here. On election night in San Diego County, and these were the numbers that were applicable in the recent off-year elections in 2014. San Diego has about 1,540 what they call precincts or consolidation districts, and sometimes there's more than one precinct in a consolidation. These are individual physical places, a lot of them. Sometimes the precincts are no longer physical. They sometimes no longer have any actual physical location, and they're doing mail balloting only. However, on election night, after the precincts close, then they have to pick up the ballots from these locations. There's only a very, very slight chance that there will be much of any voter fraud, what they call voter fraud, out here at the precincts where people are trying to vote when they're not actually registered and this type of thing. And so even though a lot of the election integrity projects focus on that, it's really a distraction. The real big the big manipulation can occur later. So these ballots are transported to the central processing office, and this in California and San Diego is at the registrar of voters office. Note that we need to have durable paper ballots for this to be work well. There are sometimes voting machine cards, but there's very few of these that are actually used, very small percentage. And then the other thing that we're interested in is sign-in rosters. All of these three things are transported to the central processing office. There is an incoming inspection to check that everything is there and so forth. And then the ballots are taken out on election night, and this is kind of a weird thing in San Diego. They're scanned now using the Diebold scanners that were originally designed for use in the precincts in the central office. And the reason they're doing that is because they had trouble with keeping track of these scanning devices and the firmware that was installed, and making sure that they were initialized properly and so forth in the precinct. So this is all done by a whole bunch of volunteers. I think there's usually maybe 100 or so of these scanners set up, and then they scan them one by one, but with a whole bunch of volunteers scanning them. So they bring in a whole precinct at a time and scan them, and then the ballots from that and the scanner tapes are put into storage. We may want to look at the scanner tapes. They will let us do that. They won't let us get at the ballots. And then they take the memory card out of the scanner and bring it over to the central tabulator. Now there's a small chance that this scanner firmware will be modified or corrupted with some sort of a virus. or once it comes in and read into the central tabulator. And this is just a computer with a database of, basically a big list of all of the precincts and what the vote is for each precinct. So this central tabulator runs a software that I believe is still called GEMS. It is the Diebold. Now I guess Diebold changed their name to Premier. And that's where they read in the memory card from the scanners into the central tabulator. At the end of election night, they have read all of the ballots from the individual precincts, and some of the batches that are brought in the vote by mail process. Some of these are scanned ahead of time, and so you may have some of those in the mix at the election night report. Then, just looking at their process, at the end of the night, even though there's usually a lot of batches of vote by mail that are not completed, and we're talking about sometimes tens of thousands of ballots that are not done, these ballots are not split up into individual precincts. They are grouped together in batches, which are mixed precincts, and the scanner itself reads a precinct number off of the ballot, and then it has a batch which the central tabulator treats kind of like a precinct, even though they're all scattershot across the whole county as to where they might be. Then there's the election night report, and this is what comes out on their website. Then at the end of the night, usually somewhere around late at night, because the polls close at 8 o'clock. The ballots are transported over. They usually don't start actually counting the ballots until probably 11 o'clock. They continue to do so most of the night, and then in the morning, that's when they have this result. This is a result that you see in the paper the next day after the election night, this election night report. And this report may say 100% of the precincts are reported. However, it's not really true, because all the vote by mail ballots, which are usually quite high in number, still have not been counted yet. And we'll take a look at this actual report in raw form in a few minutes. Then they go through a process of 1%, selecting 1% of the precincts. And in San Diego, they use a number of ping pong balls in containers that are drawn out. And there's a video that we have which will shows exactly how that's being done right now, and we would like it done a little bit differently, because the way they're doing it now is it's not absolutely random, but it's random enough so that sometimes you get clusters of these occurring in one part of the county, and it's not evenly spread across the county. Then they do a 1% manual tally by taking the precincts that are selected in the 1% precinct selection. So basically, if we have 1,540 precincts, you take 10% of that and round it up, so that's 16. So they need to get 16 precincts selected here, and then they go and pull the ballots out and count those manually in a process that's reasonably, it's reasonably reliable. And at the end of that, they produce a report and basically say whether or not, basically this 1% manual tally is designed to catch trouble with their machines. It is not actually designed as a methodology for catching unscrupulous workers in the registrar of voters office, and that's really what we're trying to catch. The big danger here is the central tabulator, because at this stage you have all of the ballots scanned in here, and it's a very simple matter to transfer thousands or maybe tens of thousands of votes from one candidate or ballot proposition option to the other. So this is a huge danger. Unlike voter fraud, which occurs up here and you may get one or two voters that are wrong, we're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of votes that are switched at this point. And it could be actually done in the scanner and the firmware. We don't really know. It doesn't really matter, because either place at this point they could be modified by an unscrupulous worker inside the registrar of voters itself. And they've done studies on this and shown that it would only take one or two mouse clicks to get that to happen, and no one would really be able to find out, because the total number of votes is the same. Now, what we're proposing here in the snapshot oversight process is very, very simple for you to actually perform. And let's go through the steps which are listed over here on the right. Number one, we send a letter to the registrar prior to the election requesting the snapshot CD prior to the 1% precinct selection, and that's shown right here. So what we're asking from them in this letter is that before they perform this random precinct selection process, and that's really important to emphasize, before, we need to get this entire snapshot CD, which includes all of the races for the entire election, in our hands. Then after that, they perform the 1% precinct selection, do the manual tally, and produce the report. We take the CD, do some data reduction, and we can compare precinct by precinct with the ones that they selected. So the process is, we ask for this, we pick up the snapshot CD prior to the 1% precinct selection, participate in this 1% precinct selection, and video record it, then provide some oversight of the manual tally process and do a bit of video recording there, as much as they'll allow. And then we retain this report at the end, and we compare this, and we find out if it looks like they've made change, if there's a problem with the election. Now, the reason this works is because this selection is random. The 1% precinct selection is random. They don't know which precincts are going to be selected for the tally, and it could be any of them. Now, if they did the central tabulator manipulation of the vote, it would be manipulated prior to the election night report, because in the morning, this is what everybody goes by as to what happened in the election. The election night report, the suspicious races are those where the candidate seems like they probably should have won, but they lost, and they probably lost by like 5% or more, so it looks like there should be no question about the there's no reason that anybody should question it. And so that's why you want to probably suspect those, but not too much so that they can get away with actually fixing the election. Now, if it's changed here, then when we get the snapshot CD, we will also see the changes. Okay. However, the 1% precincts that go through the manual tally have to match the actual ballots. So in those precincts, they have to match, or else there's a big problem for them. Now, what we think may happen is the unscrupulous employee changes the votes in the central tabulator. Then, when the 1% precincts are selected, that individual unchanges those so that they will match in the 1% manual tally, and changes other precincts to make up the difference in the modification of the vote. All right? This can't happen anymore if you do this, because we've captured the snapshot CD. So the 1% the precincts that are involved in the 1% manual tally have to also match the original data. And when we see what happened in the manual tally, then we can take a look at the original data. What this does is eliminates the possibility of an unscrupulous worker changing the vote here, finding out what the 1% selection is, and unchanging those back so that the manual tally will match, and changing others so that the report still works out. After we participate in the random selection, we provide oversight of the 1% manual tally process. We obtain the report. We reduce the data from the snapshot CD, and we have software to do that, and compare the snapshot with the report by the registrar. And then we review the manual tally working documents and sign in rosters. I'll go over that in a minute. I'm going to show you each one of these steps in a little bit more detail in the next video, but I don't want this one to go on too long. I do want to say, though, that we are not able usually to get these vote by mail ballots included in our snapshot. And the reason is because they're usually not scanned at all when we get the snapshot CD. In other words, they do the 1% precinct selection, and included in that are the batches that are going to be used for checking the vote by mail scanning. And those batches are not scanned yet, and therefore they're not in the central tabulator, and therefore we can't get them on our snapshot CD, and therefore they're out of control. However, we do still have enough of a capture here so that if we see that in the actual data, this is the manipulated data in the this is potentially manipulated data on the snapshot CD, and if it does not match the few the few precincts that were modified, then that raises a red flag. But we also have to see that the difference, that the manipulated data would then be leaning toward the final suspected winning candidate, whereas the precinct and the 1% manual tally would be going the other way. If you have it goes different ways, then we've caught them red-handed. Okay, I'm going to stop this part of the video now, and we're going to go on to look at each one of these steps in a little bit more detail.